And we are back. I think I've said it all the time, like every time to this point. I'm excited. I'm always excited about being able to talk to you. And this week is no different. It's actually pretty interesting for a lot of reasons, and I guess we'll get into it. But this feels good. It always feels good coming into this, and I emphasize feeling because a huge part of creativity is this idea around feelings and how things make you feel. It was exciting because this is graduation week, and I'm also an adjunct professor at the world-renowned Parsons, and I teach integrated design in their thesis project, and a lot of my students graduated this week. Matter of fact, yesterday I was at a graduation. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more of that. I'm not sure, but I want to start this off how we always start off our conversation with an exercise of mindfulness. So, as always, let's just spend the next 10 seconds focusing on our breath, starting now. And we are here. And right after that, we generally I always want to kind of shake you up a little, bring you in a moment, and start off with a puzzle. So a brain teaser for today is what can I put in a bucket to make it lighter? What can I put in a bucket to make it lighter? As you think about that, let's talk about now, today. Like I said, it was interesting. A lot of my students graduated, and it was beautiful to see a lot of their journeys. And the thesis project is always interesting because it's a culmination of everything they've worked on. And I had the opportunity when they showcased their work at the symposium. I was asked to kind of MC that, and I told a story about this idea of introducing myself. I've always been, I try not to tell people all the things that I'm interested or the things that I've done or my titles because it almost feels like I'm all over the place. And then naturally, how people react to it is jack of all trades, master of none. And I don't have a problem with that, but I feel like people truly don't understand the full scope of that statement, but the full quote itself. And this was the conversation I was having with my students because a lot of them felt like for their thesis project, they had to pull from all these trades that they learned over the course of their 4 years. And they didn't feel as if they had that one thing that they were expert at. But that is, I think that has been my life in the sense of I introduced myself always as a polymath, but I later kind of settled on this intro as I am a creative whose creativity takes shape in a form of innovation. But I ended that conversation with my students, and I kind of told the story while I was on stage that the full quote is, jack of all trades, master of none, but oftentimes better than the master of one. And I think that's powerful because a lot of us sometimes feel like we can be all over the place, but ultimately it comes together. And I think if we kind of appreciate those moments when we have the opportunity for it to come together, then we will realize that we are amazing beings and we're doing amazing things, and we shouldn't necessarily take that for granted. With that said, today's conversation, the thing I want to talk about today is the idea of controlled creativity. Not to be confused with creative control. I think creative control is a more familiar term. And we generally, when we think of the idea of creative control, it's having authority over the look and feel of the art that comes from your creativity. So that end product, the art that comes from your creativity, having control of what that looks like when it's presented, that is creative control. What I want to talk about today is controlled creativity. It's having authority over the process, the creative process that you go through to create the art. So one is heavily focused on the final product, the product that comes from the creativity, which is creative control. But I'm more focused on the process, the creative process that is used to create the art, which is the controlled creativity. And it's interesting because I've talked about this idea of having to be able to use my creativity on demand, and that is a gift and a skill that I've learned over time. But a lot of us creatives and creative people in general know that to be fully creative, a lot of it requires you to let go of control and almost lean on your subconscious as the guide, right? And that is, and me saying that is, I want to add some context to that for a couple reasons. So one, I've never been somebody who lives in extremes. I don't want to. I'm a Libra, but I'm not too big on astrology and star signs, but I am a well-balanced individual, and I've found that in my life, rather than kind of bouncing from extremes, I just find this cadence of just maneuvering in this space where I have some form of control of my emotions in either direction. But I'm saying that to say that I generally don't live in extremes. And there's one extreme when we talk this idea of controlled creativity. One extreme is like, hey, just go and run free and let your creativity guide you. And it can almost come across as, to the earlier point, all over the place. It's almost like there is no structure to it. And then you cannot control the products that generally come from that, right? It's in that particular approach, you don't know where your creativity is leading you until you get there. And and if you wait till you get there, then you might find out too late that what came from it was almost a waste, because it didn't necessarily solve. If it was a problem that triggered this, it didn't solve the problem. If you were trying to achieve something, because you lost sight of what the limitations were, it's almost like you wasted a lot of your creativity because it was in excess. And then the other extreme is this idea of a more confined, limited, with parameters approach to creativity. And if it's too much, any creative, and the process could be stifled. And then you limit the possibilities, you limit the what can come from this creative process. I tend to find this happy medium, and it has worked for me. And I want to talk about myself as a service provider. The consulting firm that I own and run, which is kind of, this podcast is an extension of that. It's called NOM. It is the Creative Conduit. We are a creativity and innovation as a service shop. But when I get called in a professional capacity and I have to use my creativity to solve problems, when I walk into these rooms, I generally have this ideation process initiated and carried through based on the answers of two particular questions. The first question is, what is the ideal solution? Barring any type of restrictions or limitations, what does the ideal solution look like? Without technology, without anything else, just in an ideal situation, what does the human experience look like? And that is always my first question. That gives me my North Star. This is what we're ultimately trying to achieve. And then the second question is, give me the parameters in which I have to be creative. Because a part of creativity itself is working around those limitations. I've been in situations where I've been allowed to just allow my creativity to run wild, just uncontrollably. And the solution almost feels so next level, so out of this world, so innovative, only to find out that it cannot work within the confines of the industry, particular area and niche that it was ultimately designed to build for. And that's the reason I always ask the second question: what are my limitations? Because you know that particular industry better than I do. My job here is to be creative, to be innovative. Your job is to keep me sane. We talked about this insanity or mental, whether or not there's a mental illness component associated with creativity on a previous episode. But your job is to keep me controlled. And by me, I mean my creativity. And what I've learned is once I establish those two things, the outcome is always more on point. It is effective. It is efficient. Because I was able to kind of control it. And it's interesting because as much as we talk about this idea of control, I don't know that it can truly be controlled, because creativity itself is erratic. It is all over the place. The process itself is sometimes chaotic. It's messy. Most creatives, when they're designing and creating, it's a messy process. And this may be why. So one of the things that we offer at NOM is like creativity workshops. But those are products of what I thought was a flawed process. What process in particular? Design thinking. So when I was introduced to the concept of design thinking, I was fascinated by it just because of what it could create. And I studied it. I became a facilitator of it. But over the years of doing that, I found a flaw in it. And it was this idea that knowing that the creative process is so chaotic, so messy, and then having to introduce this concept of design thinking where it's more procedural. You do these particular steps in this particular way. It almost feels a stark contrast to the creative process that I know. So it allowed me to find a way for these two things, one being individuals who are not so connected to their creativity, and taking this design thinking process and having those two find ways to coexist for the ultimate goal, which is to find a solution to a problem. And I did my research. I studied people. I studied the process. And ultimately, I found what was missing in the design thinking process. It's almost like a precursor. What we offer is a precursor to design thinking, a process where we reconnect individuals to their creativity. So when they walk into the design thinking process, they are their best creative self. And that allows them to produce more effective solutions at the end of that design thinking process. But yeah, this idea of control, as much as I say that I try to put limitations and parameters, more as guidance and reins as opposed to taking full control. Um, it's almost like uh, understanding your creativity and and finding ways to efficient ways to take full advantage um, of it by being more effective. So you can't control your creativity. Let's just go with that idea. But what you can do is harness it. It's almost like or contain it. Maybe that's a better word. Less control, more contain. I watch a lot of basketball, and right now the Denver Nuggets just beat Minnesota. They're up 3-2, and the conversation was around Jokic. How if you can stop him? I don't know that I don't know that there's anybody you could stop him, but better defenders can at least contain him. And I think that's what I see it more as, less of control, more of containment. So how do you contain your creativity or take advantage of the creative moments? I think we talked about this erratic nature of creativity, how it can be all over the place. But most of us know when our creativity is triggered or how to trigger it, or the moments where it shows itself. And I want us to, whenever we identify those spaces and those particular time, is for us to put tools in place to take advantage of those creative moments. For me, I mentioned in the first video I ever did how important black is to my creative process. That's why to this day I still record in my office in this black space because it is when I'm my most creative, and it is creativity inducing. Another time when my creativity showcase itself consistently is in the early mornings. When I was a kid, my mom used to have this saying. She says, well, she still says it, but she said it a lot when I was younger, and I would do homework and it was getting late, and I was tired, and the answers weren't coming to me. She used to always say, "Son, creativity." No, it wasn't creativity. At the time, she was saying knowledge. So what she would say is, knowledge comes in the morning. And as simple as the statement may sound, it was actually true, at least for me in my own experience. So whatever it is I was working on, homework-wise as a kid, in the early morning hours, I just wake up and know all the answers. Almost like if there's this moment of clarity that happens when my body and my mind relaxes, and as it awakens, it is in this problem-solving state, and everything just becomes easier. And I've worked on that process. I've tested it out, and it in my adult life, it still remains true. So a lot of the times when I'm faced with problems to solve, I generally do this right before going to bed. I'll face the problem, write it down, talk about it. It's the last thing I do before I go to sleep. And miraculously in the morning time, early morning, 5, 6, all the answers come to me. And I usually keep a notepad and a pen right next to me, or I'll grab my phone and open the notes, and I'll answer those questions. And that has worked for me in particular. Hold on. And that is an exercise that I do in particular often, just to kind of keep my mind sharp, And then also to allow myself to remain confident in that ability, right? As with anything, any muscle, it requires constant kind of practice to keep the muscle memory there. But that is ultimately kind of how I contain or have some level of control in my creative process. Always create spaces that my creativity can feel comfortable enough to come out, and then two, have the tools around me that I can properly capture that creativity, or at least guide it in the direction that I want it to go. And that's one of the things that I would encourage you to do. It's spend time understanding where are you most creative, and then put yourself in those spaces, and that'll give you some more control over it. And then two, when you're in those spaces, leave tools that allow you to be able to, again, take full advantage of creativity when it does showcase itself. So that is the creative process, and this conversation around whether or not we do have control over it. Not to be confused again with creative control, more so controlled creativity. Listen, we're all trying to figure out this creative thing out, this idea of creativity. And I think we are all a work in progress, but it's something that we have to continue to work towards. In a perfect world, it's available to us, and we can kind of unconsciously control the process. And we know all the limitations, and we know all the parameters and everything we need to solve a particular problem, or to design something, or to create art. But unfortunately, the world isn't that easy. And there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. There's a lot of constraints that need to be accounted for. And it's just not a perfect world. So the idea of adding some constraints to allow you to design around them, to be creative around them, to leverage your creativity to maneuver through them, is not far-fetched. It is not wrong. I think it allows you to showcase your ability on how creative you can be, and then what can come from it. I think the parameters and the constraints and the limitations showcases your prowess, your creative prowess, and lean in on that. So with that said, make it less about controlled and more contained, because we don't want to live in the extremes. I think there's a time and place, and sometimes the extremes can lead to extremely innovative things. But a lot of times when we're being creative is just to solve a problem. And we cannot lose sight of what the problem we're trying to solve, especially in this creative process. And in those times when we're trying to solve those problems, understand that the constraints and the limitations and the parameters are there to help. Be a guide. With that said, I want to end this before it gets too long. And we always end it by going back to how we started. What can you add to a bucket to make it lighter? A hole. You can add a hole, and for sure, that bucket will be lighter. Enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week. We'll do this again hopefully next week. I'm looking forward to it as always, and go be great.